Alright y'all, welcome back to the channel and to some more buckshot testing. And today we've got another really interesting combination of stuff to run. We've got both the older version versus the newer version of a particular shell that should be rather interesting to see how they perform or how they compare head to head. But we're also going to be running them through a little bit more old school of a choke that I haven't seen very many people test. We've tried it a couple times with some pretty interesting results, but putting all these pieces together today should be rather fun to see exactly how it performs, because I do think there's the potential to get some pretty nice results here. But first up, for the shells that we're running, I brought out these two. We've got some old Winchester Supreme versus some Winchester XX loads, but both of these are the same shell, just the older version versus the newer version. They're even the exact same model number and everything like that, but they are both 12 gauge, 3-inch, 12 pellet loads of double-aught buck at about 1450 feet per second, and I believe these should be loaded the same as well. They are a copper-plated buckshot load with buffer material. I know the XX does not have any kind of wad in it, or shot cup, if you will, and I honestly can't remember if the Supreme does or doesn't, but considering that both of these are the exact same shell and model number and everything, I believe they should both be the same. The XX was kind of the predecessor to the older Supreme shells, and we know that the Supreme can give us some phenomenal results. We've seen it from a couple different combinations over the years that we've tested these. They're a lot harder to come by now, unfortunately, but we'll see how it compares to the newer XX variant and if there's any massive difference between them. For the setup that we're running, I brought out the Remington 1187. This one's got a 28-inch barrel on it, but we've got this choke. This is an older Remington Boar choke. It's a 700 constriction, and I would imagine this is probably another one of Remington's maybe late 90s to the mid 2000s era kind of factory choke offerings that never really went in any guns from the factory, but they offered them on the store shelf at Remington dealers and stuff like that. Not a whole lot of testing or information on these particular chokes out there, but it's shown us a couple intriguing results so far. So we'll see how it performs, considering it's kind of the era that the old Supreme shells came from, so it may work out rather nicely. But as for today's test, we're running it the same as usual. I've got two targets set up side by side at 40 yards with the chrono and templates we can lay over our results. So we'll start with the old school Winchester Supreme shells, then we'll move over to the XX and we'll see how they compare directly side by side. Is there gonna be a massive difference? I don't know. They should in theory be the same load, but that doesn't always mean the quality is the same. So let's take both of our shots and see what we actually get. Alright, so quick velocity run through before we look at our targets. Both of these shells had a boss claim of 1450. We did not see that number from either shell, but I can definitely tell you that the older Supreme shells were much hotter. They had quite a noticeable bit more recoil to them, and the velocity was a good number higher as well. So from the old Supreme shells, that shot gave us 1403, still below the 1450 claim, but for double-aught, 1400 is getting up and moving on out pretty quick. But comparing that to our 1278 that we got from the newer XX shells, quite a big difference. And like I just said, noticeable difference in recoil as well. The XX still has a decent bit of recoil to contend with, but not as hot of a loading as the old Supreme shells. So there may be a little difference in powder or something like that going on between them as well. But let's head down range and see what the pattern difference between them actually is. Okay, so now we're down here at our two 40-yard targets side by side. On the left, we have the older Winchester Supreme loads. On the right, we have the newer XX loads. And it's rather interesting to see these two put side by side, since supposedly these are pretty much the same shell. They share the same model number. They're both copper plated with buffer material and no actual shot cup portion of a wad in there, but big difference in velocity between them like we saw at the chronograph a second ago, and we see a noticeable difference in pattern between them as well. I think the pattern on the left with the older Supreme loads is definitely the better option between these two. Pattern on the right in the XX might have given us a little hotter clump of pellets right in the core, but other than that, it kind of started to string them out a little bit here, there, and everywhere. So I think the older Supreme loads are the winner today, at least through this particular older Remington Boar 700 choke. But we'll start on the left with our Winchester Supreme. We've got all 12 pellets here on the target. Pretty decent little condensed even area of shot there. Might have strung a couple of them up at the top there, a little bit away from where the rest of them were. But overall, it's a decently even spread. I did measure. We're looking at 18 inches tall by 12.5 inches wide for the entire pattern. But our farthest two pellets apart from each other are 19.5 inches, and that is the top pellet up there down to the bottom right corner pellet. Usually I say anything sub 20 inches at 40 yards is a solid performing buckshot pattern, and we're right there at it. If we didn't string those two up a little bit higher, we might kind of get down into that 15-inch range, where I really like to see a good, nice performing buckshot combination at 40. But this is a good all-around performer. It's going to do a lot of different things for you. You're carrying a lot of velocity behind those pellets, and you've got the pattern capability to do it as well, especially since it's a relatively even spread and we're not completely just stringing things all over the place. Now moving over and comparing that with our newer double X loads, little bit different looking pattern here. We still have all 12 pellets on the target. Just to the left of the white dot, we have a decent little clump of them forming. Is it enough to really call that a better core? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, technically the numbers say it is a better core, but it may just be a little bit of luck of the draw having those pellets so close together right there in that little clump. Other than that though, we've got a big vertical string up top. We got two random pellets down here off the bottom right and a flyer over there on the left as well. So outside of that little clump, big kind of strings all over the place. Not nearly as pretty of a spread. And the numbers show it as well. We're looking at 28.5 inches tall by 19.75 inches wide. The farthest two pellets across are 29.5 inches, that being the top pellet up there to the very bottom pellet down there in the center. So much more broad spread, excluding that little clump of pellets right in the core. And between these two, I still prefer the little bit more even spread that the Supreme gave us over there on the left. So I think that's going to be our winner, but we'll throw a couple templates up and see if that shows us a different story. I think both of these are going to be more than capable, but I think the Supremes are going to reign supreme between these two anyway. So first up, we have our deer template. We're on the Winchester Supreme pattern here. I did favor the template about an inch or so low because our pattern was a little bit low, but it really didn't matter one way or the other. We absolutely covered that deer's vitals and pellets, and at 1,400 feet per second, I don't think he's going to make it very far, if anywhere at all. You've got a little bit of breathing room and leeway to work with. It's not a super screaming type pattern, but you're not completely covering all the guts and the neck and the shoulder and everything in pellets either. So just a nice, solid hunting pattern right there that would absolutely do the job. Now moving that over to the newer double X shells, same story, absolutely a dead deer. You've got a good core to work with right there through the back edge of the lungs, but it's definitely not as pretty or as even of a spread, just like we expected to see. So both deer hunting capable for sure out to 40 yards, but I would still prefer the older Supreme shells if I'm using these two. Next up, we have a coyote template. We're back on the older Winchester Supreme loads. This is probably not a very common predator hunting dedicated type of combination, but if you had it and was deer hunting with it and just so happened to have a coyote come by or something, this is the pattern you're working with. Again, I favored the template a little low because the pattern was a little low, but it would be absolutely coyote medicine all day long. 40 yards or so with that would make for a very bad day out of the Supreme loads for any kind of predator species. And now moving that over to our newer double X loads. Same story as we saw with the deer. Absolutely going to be a dead coyote as well, but not as pretty of a pattern. And really, for smaller animals like this, I really do like the little more even broad spread compared to this more stringy and splotchy looking pattern. So still, the Supreme shells are the better option, although both of them would definitely work. And finally, we have our torso cutout template. We're once again back on the older Supreme shells. Not necessarily trying to say this is a 40-yard home defense combination, but it will give the guys that may not be hunters a little better reference than a body size of an animal. This is an 18 by 30 inch cutout, and we absolutely covered the chest cavity of a two-legged creature out here at 40 yards. So beautifully even looking pattern, especially with the torso cutout for the older Supreme shells. But comparing that now to the newer double X loads, still, any two-legged creature would not be having a very good day. You've got a clump of them right through the upper chest cavity there that would not feel good. It would certainly do the job, but not nearly as pretty even of a spread. So that's exactly what we've seen, and that just goes to confirm, even through all of our templates, I think the older Winchester Supreme loads performed better for us today than what the newer double X loads actually did. All right, well, what do we think about these results right here? As we've already covered, I'm calling the older Winchester Supreme loads the better performer, at least through this combination. However, in our testing with both the older Supreme loads and the newer double X loads, I don't know that we've ever put them head to head necessarily, but I kind of think this is usually what we would get. The older Supreme shells are usually pretty decently evenly condensed. They may not provide the tightest screaming hot buckshot patterns out of any other loading that's been available on the shelf over the last 20 years, but they're always a pretty reliable, solid performer with a good amount of velocity. As far as the double X goes, they're not a bad shell. We've seen better out of them than what this gave us. So it does make a difference with those, especially what choke you use. Some are better than others for sure, but the double X has been a little less impressive on average across the board. So something has changed. Obviously, the velocity on them is noticeably different. Maybe the powder makeup, the way it burns as it goes down the barrel, something like that has made some degree of difference. Maybe there's a little bit different kind of a gas seal or fiber piece or something like that that sits under them compared to the older Supreme loads that makes a difference as well. But overall, I still would rather run the older Supreme loads if I had my choice between these two. The older loads are harder to find, but you can still come across them sometimes at smaller town gun shops and stuff like that, or in bargain bins in different places. And I know plenty of people that have a bunch of them stacked up in their basement as well. So if you can get the old Supreme loads, I would kind of tend to prefer them over the newer double X variant, at least from what I've seen. But let me know all your thoughts down below. Is this about what you expected to see? Were you a little surprised one way or the other? Have you tested any of the older Supreme or the newer double X loads? And if so, what kind of results have you gotten? Which one of these options would you prefer to run? Is there a winner for you one way or the other, whether it's the more even condensed spread or the better core? And what other testing do you want to see us do with either of these loadings or other new versus old type of shells and stuff like that? Let me know all that down below. But with that being said, I've got some more testing to get done for you guys, so I'm going to get back to it. As always, you have the channel Instagram as well as the mailbox where you can send stuff if you'd like. All that information will be in the description if you're interested in it. But I'm going to get back to it, so I'll see y'all in the next one.